Ethan Miller adjusted his tie in the reflection of his car window, exhaling slowly as Seattle's evening drizzle tapped gently against the glass. The wet streets shimmered beneath the glow of streetlights, their reflections stretching like golden ribbons across the pavement. He had never been particularly good at dating. Not before his marriage, and certainly not after losing Emma 3 years ago. His late wife had been the center of his universe, and when she passed away suddenly from a car accident, Ethan's world cracked open and everything familiar fell apart. Since then, his life had revolved around one constant, his daughter Lily. She was 8 now, with her mother's laugh and her father's stubborn streak. Every decision he made was with her in mind. Her breakfast before school, her ballet recitals, her favorite bedtime stories about dragons and brave little girls. Between his full-time job as a graphic designer and his role as both father and mother, he'd long ago accepted that his love life was permanently on hold, but his best friend Jake had refused to accept that. "You're 35, not 80. Jake had said one night over beers in Ethan's kitchen, the sound of Lily's laughter floating from the next room. "You've done the hard part. You've survived, man. It's time you let yourself live again." Ethan had rolled his eyes, but Jake wasn't the kind of person you could easily ignore. The next morning his phone buzzed with a text. "Friday night, 7 p.m, La Bella Luna. Her name's Olivia. Don't chicken out." Now it was Friday night, and Ethan was standing outside La Bella Luna, a warm, softly lit Italian restaurant tucked between a florist and a vintage bookstore. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see small tables draped with white linen and couples leaning close, talking over candlelight. He wasn't sure if he was ready for any of this. Ready to open his heart, ready to risk disappointment, ready to sit across from someone new and tell them about the life he'd once had and the space that still ached from losing it. But he'd promised Jake he would go. More importantly, he'd promised himself he'd at least try. When he stepped inside, the air was filled with the comforting scent of baked bread and garlic. A soft jazz melody floated from hidden speakers, and a waiter greeted him with a polite smile. "Reservation for Ethan Miller," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The waiter nodded and gestured toward the dining area. "Your table's not ready quite yet, but you're welcome to take a seat anywhere until your guest arrives." Ethan nodded and scanned the room. Near the window sat a woman with long, dark hair, dressed simply but elegantly in a navy blouse. She was alone, reading a book with a half-empty glass of red wine beside her. Something about her seemed calm, genuine, not the nervous glancing at the door energy he expected from someone waiting for a blind date. Still, she looked like an Olivia. He hesitated for a moment, then straightened his jacket and walked toward her table. "Hi," he said, smiling nervously. "Olivia?" The woman looked up, startled, her large brown eyes softening when she met his. A small smile curved her lips. "Yes," she said, closing her book gently. "You must be Ethan." Relief washed over him. "Yeah, that's me." He sat down, trying to seem casual. "I hope I'm not late." "Not at all," she said, her tone warm and easy. "I was just reading to pass the time. I'm glad you made it." From the moment they began talking, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years: ease. She asked about his work, genuinely interested, and didn't flinch when he mentioned that he was a single dad. Instead, she smiled and said, "That's amazing. It must be hard, but it sounds like you're doing great." He found himself talking more than he expected to, about Lily's obsession with painting rocks and leaving them around the neighborhood, about the challenges of parenting alone, about how grief had shaped him, but also made him grateful for small joys. She listened with real attentiveness, occasionally offering bits of her own story, how she'd grown up in Portland, how she loved reading late into the night, how she believed that people crossed paths for reasons they might not understand at first. Their food arrived, pasta and wine, the kind of comforting meal that felt more like conversation than consumption. Between bites, they joked about bad coffee dates, shared stories of Seattle's unpredictable weather, and even laughed about how awkward blind dates could be. Ethan found himself watching her when she spoke. The way she gestured lightly with her hands, the way her laughter came easily and without pretense. For the first time since Emma's death, he didn't feel weighed down by his past. He felt alive. By the time dessert came, the world outside had turned to a blur of rain and soft light. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smiling. "You know," he said, "I wasn't sure about this at first. My friend Jake basically ambushed me into coming. But I'm really glad he did." She tilted her head, amused. "So was I a pleasant surprise," he chuckled. "More than pleasant." Her eyes sparkled with warmth. "Then I guess we should thank Jake." They were halfway through a shared tiramisu when a shadow fell across their table. Ethan looked up to see a woman standing there. Blonde hair, green dress, a polite but uncertain smile. "Excuse me," she said carefully, her voice hesitant. "Are you Ethan Miller?" Ethan blinked, confused. Yes." The woman's smile widened, but it carried an edge of confusion. "Hi, I'm Olivia, from the app." A long, silent second passed before the world seemed to tilt just slightly. Ethan turned slowly toward the brunette sitting across from him, whose brows had lifted in equal confusion.
"Wait," she said, a small laugh escaping her lips.
"You're on a blind date, too." It took him a moment to process it, the realization hitting with both embarrassment and disbelief. He had sat at the wrong table, the wrong Olivia. Heat rose to his face as he ran a hand over his neck. "Oh my God," he muttered under his breath, glancing between the two women. I'm so sorry. I thought..." The brunette began to laugh, not a mocking laugh, but one full of genuine amusement. "Well," she said through her smile, "this is definitely a first for me." Even the real Olivia couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Ethan felt his mortification melt slightly under the humor of the situation. "I swear," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "this is exactly the kind of thing that would happen to me." Maya, as he would soon learn her name to be, smiled softly. Well, it was still a lovely conversation, even if it wasn't meant to be our date. As Ethan stood, preparing to move to the correct table, he caught her eye once more. Something in that brief look made his pulse slow, a quiet recognition that felt strangely familiar. He didn't know it yet, but sitting at the wrong table that night might have been the most right thing he'd done in years.